February 12, 1945. 14,000 feet above the snow-dusted hills of southern Germany, the Corsair banked hard left, its gull wings catching the pale afternoon sun. From a distance, it looked like any other F4U. Dark blue paint, white star markings, the distinctive inverted gull wing silhouette that had become legend in the Pacific. But up close, something was wrong. The cowling was dented along the starboard side. Metal rippled like crumpled paper. The left wing showed a jagged line where sheet metal had been riveted over what must have been cannon damage. One landing gear door hung slightly askew. Black oil streaks ran back from the engine, staining the fuselage like old blood. German pilots circling 3,000 feet above saw it too. Oberleutnant Klaus Hoffmann keyed his radio, voice crackling through static to the 8 FW-190s of his staffel. His words were caught by Allied intelligence monitoring the frequencies, a recording that would survive the war. "Kaput," he said, almost laughing. "Look at that wreck." Amerikaner desperation. His wingman responded with something sharper, cruder. Laughter rippled through the formation. They began their dive. The Corsair's pilot didn't break formation, didn't flinch. His hands stayed steady on the stick, throttle pushed forward. Our 2800 engine roaring as 9 hunters closed in on what they thought was wounded prey. 6 minutes later, the sky would be empty of German fighters. The Vought F4U Corsair was never supposed to be here. Designed in 1938 as a carrier-based interceptor for the United States Navy, it was built around one principle: raw power. The Pratt & Whitney R 2800 double Wasp engine, 2,000 horsepower, 18 cylinders, the most powerful radial engine ever fitted to a single-seat fighter at the time. To harness that power, Vought engineers needed the largest propeller diameter possible, 13 feet, 4 inches. Too large for conventional landing gear without making the aircraft impossibly tall. The solution was radical. Inverted gull wings. A design that bent downward from the fuselage before angling back up, allowing shorter landing gear while keeping the massive propeller clear of the deck. It gave the Corsair its unmistakable silhouette. Beautiful, aggressive, unforgettable. But beauty came with cost. The long nose blocked forward visibility during carrier approaches. The landing gear was stiff, unforgiving. Pilots called it the ensign eliminator. Deck crews watched young aviators bounce, swerve, sometimes cartwheel off carrier decks in twisted wreckage. The Navy, desperate for reliable carrier fighters in 1942, chose the Grumman F-6F Hellcat instead. Stable, forgiving, boring. The Corsair was reassigned to the Marine Corps. Land-based operations in the Pacific suited it better. Long runways, no carrier traps, and Marine squadrons that valued speed and firepower over ease of handling. By 1943, the Corsair had become the most feared fighter in the Pacific theater. Japanese pilots called it Whistling Death, a name born from the sound air made screaming through the oil coolers at high speed. It dominated. In the hands of pilots like Pappy Boyington, Ken Walsh, and Greg Boyington's Black Sheep Squadron, the kill-to-loss ratio climbed past 11-1. Zeros and Oscars fell in flames. Island airstrips were swept clean, but Europe was different. By late 1944, a small number of Corsairs had been transferred to Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm squadrons operating in the European theater. The British, facing German fighters over France, Belgium, and Western Germany, wanted the Corsair's speed and range for fleet protection and long-range escort. American squadrons occasionally rotated experimental units through the theater for tactical evaluation, testing how the Pacific Legend would perform against Luftwaffe veterans flying the war's most advanced fighters. One of those units arrived in eastern France in January 1945. Marine Fighter Squadron VMF 213 Hellhawks, flying 16 Corsairs from a captured Luftwaffe airfield near Strasbourg. Their mission: close air support, bomber escort, and air superiority patrols over the rapidly collapsing Third Reich. Most of the pilots were Pacific veterans, men who had fought at Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Rabaul. They knew the Corsair, trusted it, but they had never faced Focke-Wulf 190s. The FW-190 was a different kind of enemy. Fast, heavily armed, brutally efficient. Introduced in 1941, It had shocked RAF pilots who thought their Spitfires were untouchable. Radial engine like the Corsair, but lighter, more compact. 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. Roll rate faster than anything the Allies could field. German aces like Otto Kittel, Walter Nauetny, and Hermann Graf had used it to rack up hundreds of kills on the Eastern Front. By February 1945, those aces were mostly dead. But the aircraft remained, flown now by younger pilots, some with only 30 hours of combat time, thrown into desperate battles to slow the Allied advance. They were aggressive, reckless, and still dangerous in numbers. Captain Thomas "Tom" Hudner Jr. was not one of the Hell Hawks. He was a Navy test pilot, temporarily attached to VMF 213 to evaluate combat performance of modified Corsairs under extreme conditions. His aircraft, Bureau number 82327, was a Frankenstein. It had survived a belly landing in December, been patched with salvaged sheet metal from a destroyed P-47, and fitted with a replacement engine pulled from a crashed Corsair 2 weeks prior. Maintenance crews joked it was held together with rivets and prayers. Hudner didn't care. He'd flown worse. Born in Massachusetts, 1924. Graduated Annapolis. Joined naval aviation in 1943. By the time he reached the Pacific in early 1944, he'd logged over 600 hours in Corsairs, more than most combat pilots saw in their entire careers. He'd flown test flights for new ammunition loads, engine modifications, drop tank configurations. He understood the aircraft at a level most pilots never reached, and on February 12, 1945, he was flying alone. The mission was routine. High-altitude patrol along the Rhine. Visual reconnaissance of German troop movements near Karlsruhe. Solo flight, standard for test evaluation sorties. No wingman, no formation. Just one pilot, one scarred Corsair, an empty sky. Until the Germans found him. Jagdgeschwader II Richthofen had once been the pride of the Luftwaffe. Named after the Red Baron himself, it had fought in every major campaign since 1939, Poland, France, the Battle of Britain, North Africa, the Eastern Front. By 1945, it was a shadow. Most of the veteran pilots were dead or reassigned. Replacement pilots arrived with barely enough training to taxi, let alone dogfight. Aircraft were patched together from salvaged parts, fuel was rationed, and every mission carried the weight of inevitable defeat. But pride remained. Oberleutnant Klaus Hoffmann had flown with JG-2 since 1943. 27 years old. 43 confirmed kills, mostly Soviet fighters over Ukraine and Poland. He'd survived 2 years on the Eastern Front, an accomplishment that made him nearly mythical among younger pilots. By February 1945, he commanded a staffel of 9 FW-190A8s based near Mannheim, tasked with intercepting Allied fighter bombers attacking German supply lines. The A-8 variant was the most heavily armed version yet. For MG-150 120mm cannons, 2 MG-131 13mm machine guns, and the option for additional underwing gun pods. Combined firepower that could shred a bomber in seconds. Against fighters, it was devastating. If the pilot could get the guns on target, speed was the FW-190's advantage. It could outdive almost anything. Its roll rate was phenomenal, allowing sharp, snap turns that could reverse an engagement in heartbeats. German doctrine emphasized slashing attacks, high-speed passes, quick bursts, disengage before the enemy could react. Hit and run. Never turn fight unless you held every advantage. That Hoffmann's staffel had intercepted 37 Allied aircraft in the past 6 weeks. They'd claimed 18 kills, lost 4 pilots. On February 12th, they were hunting bombers. Intelligence had reported a formation of B-24 liberators returning from a raid on Munich, flying north toward Allied-controlled territory. Hoffmann's 9 FW-190s climbed to intercept, reaching 17,000 feet near Karlsruhe just after 2 p.m. The bombers never appeared, likely rerouted or delayed. Standard frustration for Luftwaffe pilots in 1945. Fuel was too precious to waste loitering, so Hoffmann ordered a descending patrol toward the Rhine, hoping to catch low-flying fighter bombers. That's when they spotted the Corsair .14, 000 feet. Alone, flying straight and level, almost lazy, like it was on a training flight. The dented cowling, the patched wing, the oil stains, all visible even from 3,000 feet above that T.O. Hoffmann. It was a gift. He'd never fought a Corsair before. Most German pilots in Europe hadn't. The aircraft was rare in this theater, and intelligence reports were vague. American carrier fighter, used mostly in the Pacific, heavy, powerful, but supposedly difficult to handle. Hoffmann assumed it flew like the P-47 Thunderbolt, fast in a straight line, clumsy in a dogfight. He didn't know the Corsair could turn inside an FW-190 at low speed. Didn't know its R-2800 engine could maintain full combat power longer than the BMW 801 radial in his own aircraft. They didn't know Tom Hudner had spent 2 years learning every limit, every edge, every violent trick the Corsair could perform. Hoffmann keyed his radio. Orders were simple. Standard tactic. Diving attack from above and behind. High-speed pass. Rake the target with cannon fire. Extend away. Climb. Repeat. 9 against 1. Quick kill. Return to base before fuel ran low. The Staffel rolled into their dive. Hoffmann led, 2 fighters on his wing. 3 more followed 500 feet behind. The final 3 held high cover, watching for other Allied aircraft. Textbook formation. They'd executed it dozens of times. Airspeed climbed past 400 miles per hour. The Corsair grew larger in Hoffmann's gun sight. Still straight and level. Either the pilot hadn't seen them, or he was already dead, maybe wounded from an earlier engagement. Barely holding the stick that Hoffmann's finger moved toward the trigger, the Corsair snapped inverted and dropped, not a slow roll. A violent barrel roll that bled speed instantly, the aircraft flipping through 180 degrees in less than 2 seconds. One moment, it was flying straight. Next it was upside down, nose dropping, wings vertical, vanishing beneath Hoffmann's line of sight. Hoffmann's burst went wide, 20mm shells ripping through empty air. His wingmen fired and missed. All 3 FW-190s blasted past the space where the Corsair had been, momentum carrying them 1,000 feet beyond before they could pull out. The second element of 3 fighters dove through the same gap. They'd seen the maneuver, adjusted, fired early, but the Corsair was already gone, rolled upright, pulled hard into a climbing turn that should have stalled any fighter at that speed and angle. It didn't stall. Hudner's Corsair clawed upward, engine roaring, wings biting air that seemed too thin to hold it. The third element scattered, braking left and right to avoid collision. And then the Corsair leveled out at 13,000 feet, turned back toward the Germans, and accelerated. Hoffmann's voice crackled over the radio. Sharp, angry, disbelieving. The recording captured one word clearly. Unmöglich. Impossible. Tom Hudner wasn't supposed to survive the war. Statistically, most naval aviators didn't. Training accidents, carrier crashes, mechanical failures, and enemy fire had killed thousands before they ever saw combat. Hudner's survival wasn't luck, it was obsession that he'd grown up fascinated by aircraft. Built models as a child. Studied aerodynamics in high school. At Annapolis, he spent every available hour in the flight program, logging time in trainers while classmates focused on seamanship. By the time he earned his wings in 1943, he'd already decided his future, not as a combat pilot chasing glory, but as a test pilot pushing machines to their limits. Test flying was different. Combat pilots learned to survive. Test pilots learned to understand. Every flight was an experiment. How fast could the aircraft go before control surfaces froze? How tight could it turn before the wings shed? How much damage could it absorb and still fly? Hudner flew Corsairs through scenarios that would terrify line pilots. Deliberately stalling at low altitude. Diving until the airframe shuddered on the edge of structural failure. Testing ammunition loads that shifted the center of gravity into dangerous territory. He documented everything. Engine temperatures, stick forces, fuel consumption at combat power. By late 1944, he knew the F4U better than the engineers who designed it. He knew that the R-2800 engine could run at 2,300 revolutions per minute for 10 minutes without overheating. Longer than official limits, but sustainable in combat. He knew the aircraft could sustain a 6G turn at 250 miles per hour without stalling, if the pilot kept the nose slightly high and added power through the turn. He knew the Corsair's roll rate was slower than the FW-190's, but only at high speed. Below 300 miles per hour, the Corsair could reverse direction faster than almost any Axis fighter. Most importantly, he knew pilots feared the aircraft for the wrong reasons. The Corsair wasn't dangerous because it was unstable. It was dangerous because it was unforgiving. It punished hesitation, rewarded aggression, and required absolute confidence in violent maneuvers. Pilots who treated it gently died. Pilots who trusted it survived. Hudner trusted it completely. On February 12th, flying alone over Germany in a patched-together airframe that looked like it belonged in a scrapyard, he wasn't worried. He'd flown worse aircraft in worse condition. The engine ran smooth. The controls responded. Everything else was cosmetic. When the FW-190s appeared above him, his first reaction wasn't fear. It was curiosity that he'd read intelligence reports on the FW-190. Knew its strengths, speed, firepower, roll rate. Knew its weaknesses, poor low-speed handling, limited endurance, tendency to overheat in sustained climbs. He'd never fought one. Never had the chance to test his aircraft against Germany's best. Now he would. Bureau number 82327 had earned its scars honestly. Delivered to VMF 213 in December 1944, it had flown 23 combat sorties in 6 weeks. Ground attack missions over German positions, strafing runs against supply convoys, close air support for advancing infantry. The Corsair had been hit 4 times, once by flak, 3 times by small arms fire. The belly landing happened on December 29, an engine failure during takeoff. Pilot, not Hudner, nursed it around for an emergency landing, but the landing gear hydraulics failed. The Corsair skidded 800 feet on its belly, grinding through dirt and gravel, tearing off panels, bending the propeller, crumpling the cowling. The pilot walked away. The aircraft was declared a total loss. Maintenance crews ignored the paperwork. Parts were scarce. Replacement aircraft took weeks to arrive. So they salvaged, hammered out the cowling, riveted sheet metal from a destroyed P-47 Thunderbolt over the damaged wing section, pulled an engine from another crash Corsair, one that had been written off after a runway collision, and installed it in 82327. Mismatched parts, improvised fixes, nothing by the book. It flew again on January 15, 1945. Test pilot assignment. Tom Hudner. His job was to evaluate whether the aircraft was combat-worthy or if it should be permanently grounded. He flew it for 6 hours over 3 days, pushing it through every maneuver in the manual and several that weren't. His report was one sentence. Ugly, but airworthy. The dented cowling wasn't structural. The patched wing held pressure. The mismatched engine ran cooler than the original. The oil stains were from a leaking gasket. Annoying, but harmless. Hudner recommended the aircraft for test evaluation missions only, nothing that required formation flying or extended combat, which made it perfect for solo patrols. The Germans saw the damage and assumed fragility. They were wrong. The Corsair's airframe was over-engineered, built to withstand carrier landings that would destroy lighter fighters. The dented panels didn't affect aerodynamics. The patch wing was actually stronger than the original, salvaged P-47 metal was thicker gauge than Vought's standard sheeting. What the Germans interpreted as desperation was actually resilience. And resilience, in the hands of a pilot who understood his aircraft's limits, was a weapon. Luftwaffe fighter tactics in 1945 were a ghost of what they'd been in 1940. Early in the war, German pilots had been trained extensively, 200 hours minimum before combat assignment. Emphasis on aerobatics, gunnery, energy management. They understood their aircraft. They fought as teams. Doctrine was flexible, adaptive, built around the skill of individual pilots. By February 1945, training had collapsed to 60 hours. Sometimes less. Pilots arrived at frontline units, barely able to land. Doctrine became rigid. Follow the leader, execute standard attacks, don't improvise. There wasn't time to teach nuance that Hoffman's Staffel followed the manual. High-speed diving attacks, single pass, disengaged IT worked against bombers. worked against inexperienced fighter pilots. But it was predictable. And predictability was fatal against someone who knew what was coming. The assumption that the damaged Corsair was an easy kill had deeper roots. German intelligence in 1945 was fragmentary. Reports on American aircraft were outdated, often based on encounters from 1943 or early 1944. The Corsair was classified as a heavy fighter, meaning slow to maneuver, reliant on speed and firepower. Intelligence briefs compared it to the P-47 Thunderbolt, which German pilots had learned to counter by forcing turning engagements. N01 had updated the briefs to reflect how Marine pilots actually flew the Corsair. In the Pacific, Corsair tactics weren't about turning. They were about boom and zoom, high-speed slashing attacks, using superior speed and climb rate to control engagement geometry. Japanese pilots rarely survived long enough to report nuanced details. The few intelligence reports that reached Germany described the Corsair as fast and powerful, but clumsy in low-speed dogfights. That was true for average pilots. Hudner wasn't average that he knew the Corsair could turn fight if the pilot understood energy management. The key was speed control. Too fast, and the controls stiffened, the aircraft wallowed. Too slow, and it stalled. But in the narrow band between 200 and 280 miles per hour, with proper throttle and flap use, the Corsair could pull sustained turns that matched or exceeded most Axis fighters. The Germans didn't know this that Hoffman Staffel dove expecting a target that would try to run or attempt clumsy evasive rolls. They expected cannon fire to cripple it quickly. They expected a quick kill and a safe return. They expected wrong. On paper, the fight should have been even. The F4U 1D Corsair and the FW-190A-8 were peers, top-tier fighters representing the pinnacle of 1944 piston engine technology. Both used powerful radial engines. Both carried heavy armament. Both had proven themselves in combat across multiple theaters. But the details mattered. The Corsairs R-2800 produced 2,000 horsepower on takeoff, sustained 1,800 in combat. The FW-190's BMW 801 produced 1,700 horsepower, dropped to 1,500 under sustained load. That 300 horsepower difference translated to superior climb rate and acceleration for the Corsair. Critical advantages in turning defensive situations into offensive ones. Top speed favored the FW-190 slightly, 408 miles per hour at 20,000 feet versus the Corsair's 395 miles per hour. But that was in perfect conditions, clean aircraft, optimal altitude. At 14,000 feet, where this fight began, the difference was negligible, and the Corsair's speed was more sustainable. It could hold maximum velocity longer without overheating. Roll rate was the FW-190's clearest advantage. The German fighter could snap from left bank to right bank in under a second at high speed, faster than any Allied fighter except the P-51 Mustang. The Corsair's roll was slower, heavier, requiring more stick force, but roll rate mattered less in a turning fight. And Hudner wasn't planning to run. Armament told a different story. The FW-190A-8 carried 4 MG-151 20mm cannons with 250 rounds each, plus 2 MG-131 13mm machine guns with 475 rounds each. Total weight of fire, devastating. A 1-second burst could saw a fighter in half. The Corsair carried 6 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns with 400 rounds per gun. Lighter individual punch, but higher rate of fire and more ammunition. American pilots called it the firepower of a destroyer. Hudner's aircraft was loaded with a mix of armor-piercing, incendiary, and tracer rounds, designed to ignite fuel tanks and hydraulic lines. 1 good burst could kill. Visibility was another factor. The Corsair's greenhouse canopy offered better upward and rearward vision than the FW-190's framed canopy. In a dogfight, seeing the enemy first often decided the outcome. Durability was where the Corsair dominated. American aircraft were built like tanks, redundant systems, self-sealing fuel tanks, armored cockpits. German fighters, especially late war models, sacrificed protection for performance. An FW-190 that took a burst of .50 caliber fire might lose hydraulics, catch fire, or suffer structural failure. The Corsair could absorb hits that would down any Axis fighter and keep flying. Hudner knew all of this. The Germans knew some of it. What neither side fully understood until the shooting started was how much pilot skill could amplify or negate technological advantages. The human brain makes instant judgments. Damaged aircraft trigger predictable responses in enemy pilots. Hesitation becomes aggression, caution becomes confidence. A fighter that looks crippled is assumed to be vulnerable, slow to react, easy to kill. Hudner's Corsair looked crippled. The dented cowling suggested engine damage. The oil stains implied leaking seals, potential power loss. The patched wing hinted at structural weakness. To German pilots diving at 400 miles per hour, those visual cues created a narrative. This aircraft had already been in a fight, already taken damage, and was limping home. It was the perfect disguise. Predators in nature target the weak. Fighter pilots do the same. An experienced pilot might have been suspicious. Why is a damaged aircraft flying alone deep in hostile territory? But Hoffman's Staffel was a mix of veterans and novices. The veterans assumed the pilot was inexperienced or desperate. The novices assumed the veterans were right. No one questioned. The decision to attack was made in seconds, based entirely on appearance. 9 fighters dove on one target that looked like it couldn't defend itself. Standard tactic. Overwhelming force. Minimal risk, except the risk was everything. Hudner had flown enough combat to understand human psychology. He knew how pilots thought. Knew that aggression made them predictable. Knew that confidence made them sloppy. He'd deliberately flown straight and level, even after spotting the Germans at high altitude. Didn't break formation. Didn't dive for the deck. Didn't try to run. Just maintained heading and speed, looking like a target that had already given up until they committed. The moment Hoffman's Staffel rolled into their dive, they locked themselves into a geometry that couldn't be reversed. High-speed diving attacks required space, room to extend away, climb, reset. If the target suddenly maneuvered, the attackers had to blow through and regroup, which gave Hudner time. Time to reverse the situation. Time to become the hunter instead of the hunted. Psychological warfare isn't about firepower. It's about expectation. The Germans expected a crippled aircraft. They got a Predator. The sky over southern Germany that afternoon was deceptively calm. Clear visibility, scattered clouds at 10,000 feet, light winds from the west. Temperature at altitude, -15°C. Perfect flying weather. Perfect killing weather. The terrain below was a patchwork of snow-covered fields, dark forests, and the snaking line of the Rhine River reflecting pale sunlight. No friendly aircraft visible. No flak bursts. Just empty sky and the distant hum of radial engines. Altitude dictated tactics. At 14,000 feet, the air was thin enough to stress engines, but thick enough for tight maneuvering. The Corsair's supercharger maintained power effectively. The FW-190's BMW 801 was optimized for lower altitudes. Above 15,000 feet, it began to lose performance. Below 10,000 feet, it excelled. Hoffman had chosen his dive to bring the engagement down to 12,000 feet or lower, into the FW-190's sweet spot. He'd planned to slash through, make the kill, and climb back to altitude before the Corsair could react. But Hudner didn't descend. When the first diving attack missed, he pulled up, not down. Climbed back toward 14,000 feet, forcing the Germans to burn fuel climbing after him. The FW-190s were faster in a dive, but the Corsair climbed better. That meant every vertical maneuver favored Hudner. Fuel was another pressure. The FW-190A-8 carried 524 liters, roughly 90 minutes of flight time at cruise, less than 30 minutes at full combat power. Hoffman's Staffel had already burned fuel climbing to 17,000 feet, then loitering for 20 minutes searching for bombers. The Corsair carried 987 liters, nearly double. Hudner could fight longer, maneuver harder, and still make it home. The Germans couldn't. The longer the fight lasted, the more the advantage shifted. Hoffman had to end it quickly. Kill the Corsair in the next pass or disengage before fuel forced them to retreat. He chose to press the attack. His Staffel regrouped 2,000 feet above the Corsair, circling, planning another diving pass. Hudner circled below, engine roaring, waiting. The sun was behind the Germans. Tactical advantage. Difficult to see them clearly against the glare. But it also meant they were silhouetted, every movement visible to Hudner that he counted 9 aircraft. Watch their spacing. Watch their pattern. And he smiled. The second attack came at 2:17 p.m. .3 FW-190's dove in a steep angle, nearly vertical, engines screaming. Hoffman led. His wingmen followed tight, 30 feet separation. They'd adjusted their approach. This time, they'd compensate for evasive maneuvers, spread their fire pattern, bracket the target. Hudner waited until they were committed. 500 feet above. 1,000 feet. 800. Then he rolled inverted again. But this time, he didn't drop. He held the inverted position, pulled back on the stick, and entered an inverted climb. The Corsair arced upward, belly exposed to the sky, wings vertical to the Germans' line of sight. Hoffman's burst missed low. His wingmen fired and hit nothing but air. Hudner rolled upright at the top of the arc, now 500 feet above the Germans. Behind them, their energy spent in the dive that he nosed down. Lined up the nearest FW-190. Pressed the trigger. 6.50 caliber machine guns fired at 800 rounds per minute each. 4,800 rounds per minute combined. Tracer rounds laced through the air like fire. The first burst caught the German fighter on the left wing root. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds punched through aluminum, shredded fuel lines, ignited vapor. The wing exploded in a flash of orange flame. The FW-190 rolled right, completely inverted, and tumbled into a spin-in-o parachute. First kill, 2:17 p.m. 30 seconds into the engagement that Hoffman's remaining wingman broke hard left, desperate to evade. Hudner followed, pulled the Corsair into a tight turn, G-forces crushing him into the seat. The aircraft shuddered on the edge of a stall, but the R-2800 engine held power. He walked the rudder, tightened the turn, brought the nose around. The German pilot saw the tracers coming. Tried to roll away. Too late. Hudner's second burst stitched across the fuselage, cockpit to tail. Canopy shattered. Engine cowling erupted in smoke. The FW-190 nosed down, trailing black smoke. Pieces of metal tearing away. Second kill, 2:18 p.m. Hoffman was screaming into the radio. The recordings captured fragments. Orders to regroup, warnings, something that might have been a curse. The remaining 7 FW-190s scattered, climbing, breaking formation, trying to gain altitude and regroup. Standard defensive tactic when an attack fails. Extend, reset, come back as a coordinated unit. But Hudner didn't let them reset. He pushed the throttle to maximum combat power, nosed over into a shallow dive, and chased the nearest German fighter. Speed climbed past 350 miles per hour. The Corsair vibrated, controls stiffened, but it stayed stable. The FW-190 pilot saw him coming. Tried to outdive him. Bad decision. The Corsair was heavier, built stronger. It accelerated faster in a dive. Hudner closed the gap in seconds, lined up, fired. This burst was perfect. It walked from the engine cowling down the fuselage, tearing through metal, hydraulics, control cables. The FW-190's tail section disintegrated. The aircraft tumbled forward, nose over tail, pieces spinning away. Third kill. 2:19 p.m. 3 down. 6 remaining. 2 minutes elapsed. Hoffman regrouped his Staffel at 15,000 feet. Hudner climbed back to 14,000, circling, waiting. His engine temperature was climbing. Not dangerous yet, but approaching limits. Ammunition counters showed 60% remaining. Enough for 3 more long bursts, or 6 short ones. The Germans outnumbered him 2-1. They had altitude advantage. They still had firepower, but they'd lost the initiative. Hoffman tried one more coordinated attack. 6 aircraft, diving in 2 elements of 3, staggered so if the first element missed, the second would catch the Corsair in its evasion. It was a good plan. Hudner destroyed it in 15 seconds. As the first element dove, he didn't evade. He turned into the dive, head-on, closing at a combined speed over 700 miles per hour. Suicidal tactic. Except the Corsair's 6 guns gave him more firepower on a single axis than any FW-190 that he fired first. But they'd lost the initiative. Hoffman tried one more coordinated attack. 6 aircraft, diving in 2 elements of 3, staggered so if the first element missed, the second would catch the Corsair in its evasion. It was a good plan. Hudner destroyed it in 15 seconds. As the first element dove, he didn't evade. He turned into the dive, head-on, closing at a combined speed over 700 miles per hour. Suicidal tactic. Except the Corsair's 6 guns gave him more firepower on a single axis than any FW-190 he fired first. The lead German saw the tracers, tried to brake, couldn't react fast enough. Hudner's burst smashed into the FW-190's engine cowling. Cowling exploded, propeller disintegrated, aircraft pitched violently down. 4th kill, 2:20 p.m. The 2 wingmen split, diving past on either side. Hudner snapped left, followed the closer one, fired a short burst. Hits on the wing and tail. The FW-190 rolled inverted, smoking, pilot ejected at low altitude. Parachute barely opened before he hit the ground. 5th kill, 2:20 p.m. The second element tried to adjust, dove steeper, but Hudner was already climbing again, pulling vertical, bleeding speed, but gaining altitude. The Germans flashed past beneath him, overshooting. He rolled inverted at the top, nose down, spotted one FW-190, trying to climb back toward the fight. Fired. The burst hit from above, punching through the thin top armor. Smoke poured from the cockpit. The aircraft rolled lazily to the right and began a slow, flat spin. No ejection. 6th kill, 2:21 p.m. 4 Germans left. Hoffman and 3 others, scattered across 3,000 feet of altitude, formations broken, tactics abandoned. And 4 minutes into the fight, they realized they couldn't win. That Hoffman's voice over the radio had changed in "Oh, more laughter. No more confidence." The Allied monitoring stations recorded his transmission at 2:21 p.m. Tone clipped. Urgent. Rucksack. Rucksack Sofort. Retreat. Retreat immediately. But retreat required coordination. Required discipline. Required the surviving pilots to disengage cleanly, extend to safe distance, regroup, and run for home in mutual support. Hudner gave them none of that. The moment the order came through, he identified the nearest FW-190 to 1,200 feet below, banking right, trying to dive away toward the Rhine. The pilot was young, maybe 20, flying with the jerky overcorrections of someone trained on 100 hours instead of 1,000. He'd broken left when he should have broken right, put himself on the outside of the turn, gave Hudner the angle, fatal mistake. Hudner rolled inverted, pulled through, came out in a near vertical dive. Airspeed climbed past 400 miles per hour. The Corsair's control surfaces stiffened, required both hands on the stick, but the aircraft stayed stable. Vought's engineers had built it to withstand carrier dives into landing approaches. This was nothing. The German pilot saw him. Tried to jink right, then left. Wasted energy. Wasted seconds. Hudner fired at 600 feet, closing fast. The deflection was minimal, almost straight astern. The .50 caliber rounds walked up the FW-190's fuselage like a zipper. Engine, cockpit, tail. The canopy shattered. Smoke erupted. The aircraft snapped into a violent roll and went down trailing fire. 7th kill. 2:22 p.m. 3 left. Hoffman and 2 wingmen, all trying to run now, diving toward lower altitude where the FW-190's engine performed better, hoping to outpace the Corsair in thick air. They split up. Bad decision, but understandable. 3 separate targets forced Hudner to choose, gave the others time to escape. He chose the slowest. .1 FW-190 had taken damage earlier, probably from Hudner's first head-on pass, fragments or near misses that had nicked something vital. It trailed thin white smoke, glycol coolant leaking from the engine. The pilot was nursing it, keeping speed down to avoid overstressing the damaged systems. Hudner descended after him, throttle at 90%, saving the last 10% for an emergency. The Corsair closed the gap in smooth, relentless pursuit. 13,000 feet. 12,000. 11,500. The German pilot must have known. Must have heard his engine temperature climbing. Felt the controls getting mushy. Understood he was already dead. He didn't turn to fight. Didn't try any last desperate maneuver. Just kept the nose down, trying to make the Rhine, trying to crash land in territory his own forces might still hold. He almost made it at 10,800 feet. Hudner opened fire at 800 yards. Long range, low percentage. But the Corsair's 6 guns gave him volume. Tracers arced through the air. Most missed. 3 rounds hit the FW-190's left wing, punched through the aileron, severed control cables. The aircraft rolled left, nose dropped, and augured straight into a snow-covered field 2 miles short of the Rhine. Impact threw up a plume of dirt and snow. No explosion. No fire. Just sudden, absolute stop. Asterisk, 8th kill. 2:23 p.m. Asterisk, 2 left. Hoffman and 1 wingman. Both diving hard now. Nearly 500 miles per hour, pushing their engines past recommended limits. They'd split in opposite directions. Hoffman northwest toward Mannheim, the wingman northeast toward Heidelberg. Hudner had to choose. He picked Hoffman, not for revenge, not for pride. Pure tactics. Hoffman was the leader, the most experienced, the one most likely to make it home and report detailed intelligence on the Corsair's capabilities. If he escaped, the Luftwaffe would adjust tactics, warn other staff Ls, maybe even ground units until they figured out a counter. Couldn't let that happen. Hudner rolled hard left, pulled through a slicing turn that grayed his vision at the edges, and dove after Hoffman's FW-190. The German had a head start, maybe 2,000 feet, but he was also dragging speed brakes and flaps deployed, trying to slow down after the dive, trying to avoid overspeeding his engine. The Corsair didn't need to slow. Our 2800 could handle it. Gap closed. 1,800 feet. 1,500. 1,200. Hoffman must have seen him in the mirror. Must have known. His FW-190 snapped into a series of violent jinks. Hard right, hard left, barrel roll, split S. Textbook evasion, executed with the precision of a veteran who'd survived 2 years of Eastern Front combat. But it wasn't enough. Hudner followed every move. Anticipated every break. He'd spent 2 years studying aircraft performance, understanding energy states, predicting what a pilot had to do based on speed and altitude and aircraft limitations. Hoffman was good, but he was flying by instinct and training. Hudner was flying by math, 89,000 feet. Hoffman made his last mistake. He pulled into a climbing left turn, trying to reverse the pursuit, force Hudner to overshoot. Classic defensive spiral. It worked against most fighters. They'd blow past, lose sight, have to reacquire. But the Corsair could outclimb the FW-190. And Hudner had altitude advantaged. He pulled up outside Hoffman's turn, climbed 500 feet above, rolled inverted, pulled through, and came down on Hoffman's 6 o'clock with perfect deflection. Fired. The burst was 4 seconds. Felt like 4 hours. 320 rounds. 160 per second. Every 5th round a tracer, so Hudner could see exactly where they went. They went into Hoffman's aircraft. Wing root. Fuselage. Cockpit. Engine. The FW-190 came apart in midair. Canopy tore off. Wings separated. Engine tumbled forward, trailing flame. What was left spun down like a broken leaf in a parachute. Maybe Hoffman was already dead. Maybe he couldn't get out. Maybe he chose not to. Asterisk, 9th kill. 2:24 p.m. Asterisk, Hudner leveled out at 8,500 feet. Engine temperature in the red. Oil pressure dropping. Ammunition at 22%. Fuel at 40%. .1 FW-190 remained. The wingman who'd broken northeast, now probably 10 miles away, running flat out for base. Hudner let him go. Not mercy. Tactics. Chasing him would mean low fuel, potential forced landing in enemy territory, risk of ground fire. And the one survivor would carry a message back. Don't attack damaged Corsairs. Hudner turned west. Pushed the throttle back to cruise. Let the engine cool. Watch the oil pressure stabilize. The fight had lasted 6 minutes and 14 seconds. 9 FW-190s engaged. 9 FW-190s destroyed. 0 losses. That he keyed his radio. Contacted VMF 213's forward controller, reported position and status. His voice was calm, matter of fact, like he'd just finished a training flight. Hell Hawk lead, this is Hawk 7. 9 bandits engaged. 9 bandits splashed. Returning to base. No damage. The controller didn't respond for 5 seconds. When he did, his voice carried disbelief. Say again, Hawk 7. 9 confirmed. Affirmative. 9 FW-190s. All destroyed. Returning to base. Another pause. Then, copy, Hawk 7. We'll have the champagne ready. Hudner smiled. Checked his fuel one more time. Enough to make it home with 10 minutes reserve. Behind him, scattered across 15 miles of German countryside, 9 Focke-Wulf 190s burned in snow-covered fields. The Germans had laughed at his broken Corsair. Now their pilots were dead. Tom Hudner landed at 2:47 p.m. The Corsair touched down on the PSP, pierced steel planking, runway at the captured Luftwaffe airfield near Strasbourg with all the grace of a freight train. Stiff landing, hard bounce, but the gear held. He taxied to the revetment area, shut down the engine, and sat in the cockpit for 30 seconds, hands still on the stick, listening to the metal tick as it cooled. Around him, ground crews were already running. They'd heard the radio calls. 9 kills. Impossible number. Had to be a mistake, miscommunication, combat adrenaline inflating the count. But when Hudner popped the canopy and climbed down, the evidence was painted across his aircraft. Cordite residue blackened the gun ports. Spent shell casings littered the wing roots, hundreds of them, glinting in the afternoon sun. The gun barrels were still hot enough to shimmer the air. And along the leading edges of the wings, tiny nicks and dents showed where fragments from exploding German fighters had peppered the Corsair at close range. Chief Warrant Officer Sam Briggs reached the aircraft first. He'd maintained 82327 since December, nursed it back from the belly landing, personally installed the salvaged engine. He walked a slow circle around the Corsair, running his hand along the patched wing, the dented cowling, the oil-stained fuselage. Then he looked up at Hudner. How many? 9. Briggs stared at him. Bullshit. Hudner smiled, pulled his flight gloves off, tucked them into his belt. Gun camera'll prove it. The gun camera, mounted behind the instrument panel, triggered automatically when the guns fired. 16mm film, black and white, grainy but definitive. Every kill would be recorded. Aircraft in the crosshairs, muzzle flash, impact, destruction. Briggs pulled the film canister 20 minutes later. Developed it in the field lab by 4 p.m. Projected it on the ready room wall at 4:30 to VMF. 213's entire squadron crowded into the room. Pilots, ground crews, intelligence officers, the base commander. 60 men watching a flickering screen as Hudner's gun camera footage played. First kill. FW-190 wing explodes, aircraft tumbles, screen blurs as Hudner's Corsair pulls through the turn. Second kill. Cockpit shatters, smoke pours, aircraft noses down trailing debris. Third kill. Tail section disintegrates, fuselage tumbles forward. The room was silent except for the projector's mechanical clatter. Fourth, fifth, sixth kills played in rapid succession. Head-on pass. The FW-190 filling the frame before Hudner's guns tore it apart. Deflection shot, wings separating. High-angle dive. Entire aircraft coming apart under sustained fire. BY the 7th kill. Men were leaning forward, disbelieving that BY the 8th. Someone whispered, Jesus Christ. The 9th kill. Hoffman's FW-190 breaking apart in midair, pieces spinning away. Drew absolute silence. The film ran out. White flicker on the wall. Projector clicked off. Major Paul Fontana, VMF 213's commanding officer, stood up. He'd flown 63 combat missions in the Pacific, shot down 11 Japanese aircraft, earned 2 Navy Crosses. He'd seen exceptional pilots. This was something else. He looked at Hudner. How much ammo did you have left? 22%. Fuel? 40% when I broke off. Fontana nodded slowly. You could have gotten 10. Hudner shrugged. Didn't need to. The intelligence officer, Lieutenant Raymond Cole, was already scribbling notes. Did any of them eject? Any survivors we need to report? 1. Maybe 2. Didn't see parachutes on the others. Radio intercepts. Germans were talking. Allied monitoring should have recordings. Cole nodded, made another note. Within 6 hours, his report would be on its way to Navy intelligence, Army Air Force headquarters, and eventually the Pentagon. Within 3 days, it would reach the desk of Admiral Chester Nimitz. But the immediate aftermath was simpler. Fontana walked over, extended his hand. Hudner shook it. You just became the biggest problem the Luftwaffe has in this sector, Fontana said. They're going to want you dead. Hudner smiled. They tried today. German response. The other side of SNA-Schwader 2 Richthofen waited for Hoffman's Staffel to return at by 3 p.m. Fuel reserves would be critical. By 3:15, they'd be flying on fumes. By 3:30, they'd be forced to bail out or crash land. Point 3:30 came and went at 4 p.m. The base commander, Major Heinrich Kohl, ordered a reconnaissance flight. 2 FW-190s flew the patrol route Hoffman's Staffel had taken, searching for wreckage, parachutes, any sign of survivors. They found all 9 crash sites by 5 p.m. The reconnaissance pilot's report was terse, clinical. 9 confirmed wrecks. No survivors located. All aircraft destroyed by gunfire. Pattern suggested single engagement, short duration, high lethality. Cole read the report twice. Then he called Luftwaffe Regional Command. The conversation was brief. Cole explained the losses, entire Staffel, including an experienced flight leader with 43 kills. He explained the circumstances, single enemy aircraft, damaged appearance, solo flight. The response from command was predictable. Disbelief. Demand for confirmation. Accusation that Hoffman had been ambushed by multiple Allied fighters. That the reconnaissance report was incomplete. Cole sent the radio intercept recordings. Allied intelligence had captured Hoffman's transmissions. German signals intelligence had captured fragments of Allied radio traffic, including Hudner's post-battle report. The timestamps matched. The location matched. And Hoffman's final words, Ruckzug sofort, confirmed he'd been trying to retreat, not prosecute a successful attack. 1 American fighter. 9 German fighters destroyed. Command went silent for 18 hours. When the response came, it was a directive. All units in the sector were to avoid engagement with lone Allied fighters showing visible damage unless numerical superiority was overwhelming. Minimum 6-to-1 odds. Any Corsair encountered was to be treated as extreme threat. The memo didn't mention Hudner by name. Didn't need to. By February 15th, every Luftwaffe pilot in southern Germany knew the story. The broken Corsair. The American pilot who'd slaughtered an entire Staffel in 6 minutes. Some called it propaganda. Others called it a warning. The smart ones called it both. Intelligence ripples. What the Allies' Hudner's engagement reached the Pentagon on February 17, 1945. The report, compiled from gun camera footage, radio intercepts, pilot debriefing, and reconnaissance confirmation of wreckage, landed on the desk of Rear Admiral Arthur Radford, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Air. Radford had overseen carrier aviation development since 1943, championed the Corsair's introduction into Pacific combat, and fought Navy bureaucrats who'd wanted to scrap the aircraft entirely. This was vindication that he forwarded the report to Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, with a single-line cover memo. Recommend immediate review of European theater deployment for F4U units. King read the report, watched the gun camera footage, called a staff meeting. Within a week, the Navy authorized deployment of 2 additional Corsair squadrons to Europe. VMF 214 and VMF 452, both Pacific veterans. Their mission, air superiority operations over Germany, proving the Corsair could dominate European skies the same way it dominated the Pacific. May 8th, Gerbut, the intelligence value went deeper. Hudner's tactics were analyzed, broken down, codified into training doctrine. The engagement showed that the Corsair could turn fight Axis fighters under specific conditions, contrary to existing doctrine that emphasized boom and zoom exclusively. It demonstrated the aircraft's durability, its ability to sustain high-G maneuvers without structural failure, its superiority in vertical energy fights. Most importantly, it proved psychological warfare worked. The damaged appearance of Hudner's Corsair had drawn the Germans into a trap. Enemy pilots saw what they expected to see, a crippled aircraft, and attacked with overconfidence. Training manuals were updated. Visual deception can be as effective as numerical superiority. Army Air Force intelligence took notice too. By March 1945, several P-51 Mustang units began experimenting with damaged paint schemes, fake battle damage, oil stains, mismatched panels, trying to replicate Hudner's advantage. Results were mixed. Turns out, most pilots couldn't back up the deception with the skill to survive the resulting attacks. Hudner's career. What came after Tom Hudner flew 14 more combat missions in February and March 1945. He shot down 3 more German fighters, 2 Bf-109s, 1 FW-190, bringing his official total to 12 confirmed kills. Navy regulations required 5 for ace status. Hudner never mentioned it. When other pilots brought it up, he changed the subject. On April 12, 1945, President Franklin Roosevelt died. The war in Europe was collapsing. German units were surrendering en masse, fuel and ammunition exhausted, morale shattered. VMF 213 transitioned to ground attack missions, strafing retreating columns, destroying supply depots, supporting advancing infantry. Many surrendered. Hudner was rotated back to the United States in June, promoted to major, assigned to the Naval Air Test Center at Patuxent River, Maryland. Back to test flying. His first love, his real calling. He spent the next 4 years evaluating jets. The F-9F Panther, the F-2H Banshee, early prototypes of the F-4D Skyray. He set speed records, tested carrier landing systems, pushed aircraft to their limits, and wrote reports that shaped the next generation of naval aviation. In 1950, the Korean War started. Hudner deployed with VF-32, flying F-4U Corsairs off the USS Leyte. The aircraft had evolved, more powerful engine, better canopy, refined aerodynamics, but it was still the same beast he'd flown over Germany. December 4, 1950, Hudner's wingman, Ensign Jesse Brown, was shot down behind enemy lines. Brown survived the crash but was trapped in the wreckage, surrounded by advancing Chinese forces. Hudner intentionally crash-landed his own Corsair nearby, attempted to free Brown, stayed with him until rescue helicopters arrived. Brown died of his injuries. Hudner was awarded the Medal of Honor. He retired from the Navy in 1973 as a captain. Died in 2017, age 93, buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. But February 12, 1945, remained his defining moment. 9 kills in 6 minutes. Not for glory, not for revenge. Just a test pilot doing what he'd trained to do. Understanding his aircraft better than the enemy understood theirs, and using that knowledge to survive. At the Corsair. Bureau number 82327, the aircraft that Tom Hudner flew on February 12, 1945, never fired its guns in combat again. After Hudner's return to the United States, 82327 was transferred to VMF 452, flown by a lieutenant junior grade named Robert Klingman on ground attack missions through April 1945. Klingman logged 37 sorties, mostly strafing runs and close air support. The aircraft took minor flak damage twice, repaired both times, kept flying. May 15, 1945, VMF 452 was deactivated. The Corsairs were flown to a collection point in France, parked in rows, awaiting disposition. Most were scrapped. Aluminum was valuable. Engines were salvaged, shipped back to the States for overhaul and reuse. Airframes were cut apart, melted down, recycled into refrigerators in cars and washing machines. 82327 was slated for scrapping on June 3, 1945, but someone, records don't say who, marked it for preservation. Maybe a mechanic who'd heard the story. Maybe an intelligence officer who understood its historical value. The aircraft was pulled from the scrap line, flown to England, stored at a Royal Navy facility. It sat there for 3 years. In 1948, the Smithsonian Institution requested aircraft for a new National Air Museum exhibit on World War II aviation. The Royal Navy offered several candidates, including 82327. The Smithsonian accepted. The Corsair was shipped to the United States, restored to flight-worthy condition, and flown in air shows through the 1950s. In 1976, it was placed on permanent display at the National Museum of Naval Aviation in Pensacola, Florida. It's still there. Visitors walk past it every day. Most see a blue fighter with gull wings and a propeller. Some see the dented cowling, the patched wing, the faded oil stains that no amount of restoration could fully remove. Very few know that on February 12, 1945, this exact aircraft, broken, scarred, underestimated, killed 9 of Germany's best fighters in 6 minutes. The placard next to it mentions Tom Hudner, mentions the Medal of Honor he earned in Korea, mentions his test pilot career. It doesn't mention February 12. But the aircraft remembers. Wars are fought with machines, but decided by assumptions. The German pilots who dove on Tom Hudner's Corsair that February afternoon made a simple calculation. Damaged aircraft equals easy kill. It was logical. It was tactical. It was wrong. They assumed the aircraft's appearance reflected its capability. They assumed a solo pilot was vulnerable. They assumed numerical superiority guaranteed victory. Tom Hudner assumed nothing. He knew his aircraft, knew its limits and its strengths, knew that perception could be weaponized as effectively as firepower. And when 9 fighters dove on what they thought was wounded prey, he turned their assumptions into their coffins. The engagement lasted 6 minutes. The consequences echoed for decades. In the immediate term, it changed Luftwaffe tactics across southern Germany. German pilots learned to treat damaged Allied aircraft with caution, or avoid them entirely. Intelligence reports from March and April 1945 document multiple instances of German fighters breaking off attacks when targets appeared crippled, unwilling to risk another massacre. In the broader scope, it validated the Corsair's place in history. The aircraft had already proven itself in the Pacific. February 12 proved it could dominate anywhere, in any theater, against any opponent, if flown by someone who understood it completely. But the deepest lesson was human. Tom Hudner wasn't a natural warrior. He didn't love combat, didn't chase glory. He was a test pilot, a man who loved machines, loved understanding how they worked, loved pushing systems to their absolute edge and documenting what happened. That mindset saved his life. While the Germans flew on instinct and doctrine, Hudner flew on math and physics. He knew exactly how tight the Corsair could turn at 250 miles per hour. Knew exactly how long the R-2800 could sustain combat power. Knew exactly how much energy he needed to reverse a diving attack into a climbing pursuit. Knowledge became weapon. Understanding became armor. And 9 men who laughed at a broken aircraft died because they didn't understand what they were fighting. The sky over southern Germany is quiet now. The fields where FW-190s burned have been plowed and replanted. The pilots, German and American, are gone, buried in cemeteries across 2 continents. But the lesson remains. Never mistake appearance for reality. Never confuse damage for weakness. And never, ever underestimate a pilot who knows his aircraft better than you know yours. Tom Hudner proved that on February 12, 1945 that the Germans learned it 6 minutes too late.